Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Ann Olnick-Gumowitz, the Engelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Menard and Norton Garfinkel, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.
I'm Alexander Heffner, your host on The Open Mind. Today we continue the conversation about the future of our planet from an inconvenient truth to the ecological crisis that is climate change. The Pope's recent visit to the U.S. could be a watershed moment for constructive action forward, or not. The road to a vibrant eco-ministry continues with our guest today. Karenna Gore is director of the Center for Earth Ethics at Union Theological Seminary. The daughter of former Vice President Al Gore, Karenna furthers her family's commitment to environmental stewardship. Gore joins us when news that the air pollution-plagued Chinese are working to adopt a carbon tax system to control emissions. Will Americans suffer a similar epidemic of respiratory illness? We sure hope it can be averted. And so let me ask Karenna to begin with what we would do proactively in practice to model what Pope Francis championed in his speech before Congress, the Golden Rule, as it applies to our environment. And welcome, Karenna.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Alexander. It's really nice to be here. Well, there are some changes that need to be made to policy, and there are some changes that need to be made culturally. And I think that, first of all, we need to put a price on carbon and start to recognize that the carbon emissions that are going into the thin shell of the atmosphere are harming the entire planet. And that has to do with Paris and getting a strong agreement in Paris very shortly. And then also we need to examine our culture and our values, and through leadership on individual, community, state, nation, and global levels, start to think about values other than just short-term profit, which is really driving a lot of things in organizations now. And instead, we need to be thinking about well-being and more long-term, including future generations.
How do you define Earth ethics?
Well, Earth ethics is a value system. It's not its own system, but it's really a framework for discussion about what values we want to have drive our economies and our cultures and our civic decisions. And right now we find, I find just in terms of the conventional and sort of mainstream dialogue, there's a lot of weight given to growth, economic growth, and Earth ethics asks the question, at what cost and what kind of growth and who benefits from the growth? And that has to do with issues that are values-based, about right and wrong, about what kind of society we want to shape, and not just a kind of expansion for the sake of it.
You mentioned the word well-being, which seems to strike a chord for the community of evangelicals who you are rallying, along with the secular community, the academic community. What have you found thus far is the output of the volunteerism and the grassroots organization that collectively thus far engage the center at Union?
Well, we're engaged in on several fronts. One thing that we do is actually a cornerstone program is called our Original Caretakers program, and that is to really engage and honor and learn from indigenous traditions. So there's a long history of ecumenism at Union and many other places, schools of religion. But indigenous traditions have not always been a part of that conversation as much. So the Original Caretakers learns from that traditional wisdom, and that's a very exciting front. We also are doing eco ministry, which is really vocational and service opportunities that we can provide through education, through workshops and classes and public programming. And then we also do work with a lot of partner organizations, including evangelicals and people from all faith backgrounds. And in that, I include humanists, atheists, all different belief systems, and work together to try to put forward a voice for change that will be for a healthier planet and society.
How do these disparate faiths intersect insofar as a carbon tax is concerned, for example? It seems like a very biblical idea that descends from inconvenient truth on, that collectively you could look at Islam, the 5 pillars, you could look at Judeo-Christian conviction and say, having a tax to preserve the quality of our environment is a sound, virtuous tenet.
Well, it occurs to me to refer to something that Reverend William Barber, who's the head of the NAACP of North Carolina and a really eloquent minister, says, which is the prophet doesn't ask, is it practical? Is it feasible? Is the political climate ripe for this solution? That's not what a prophetic role is. It's to have a vision and to move towards it. And I think that you have moral voices from religious communities and other sort of values-based communities and ethicists as well that just start with what is right? Who do we want to be as a people? What sort of world do we want to see? What's the purpose here on Earth? And you get to a different place, including that it's not an open sewer. The air is not an open sewer. So start from there instead of from what kind of Congress do we have and where can we get to a place with the right kind of policy changes. So I just want to mention that so that not to fixate on necessarily carbon tax. There are different ways of doing it. And I think that just putting a price is a more market-based solution, but that's not the point. The point is the change we must be and see. And the other thing I wanted to say in response is that we have seen just this year, in addition to Pope Francis's encyclical Laudato Si', we've seen an Islamic declaration on climate change, a rabbinical letter. There have, of course, been statements from the ecumenical patriarch Bartholomew, from the Dalai Lama, and from many others, Desmond Tutu. So across the board, we're seeing a really ramped up priority on immediately ending fossil fuels. So whatever you think about the specific solutions of how we have to stop this system and era, it's harming us, and most of all harming those who are most vulnerable.
And do you think that the pockets of communities affected by fracking, for example, that are starting to speak out, you can see the film Gasland, for instance, to see the effect on human health as well as kind of the suffering of the environment, do you think that that's resonating more, especially as people travel to China and they can't breathe? Mm-hmm.
Absolutely. I mean, we're seeing the impacts of air pollution, and a lot of communities have been seeing it for a long time. And I mentioned the Original Caretakers Program. If you're walking just in the Navajo reservation, you have people living who themselves don't have electricity, but they're living in a place where fossil fuel extractionist industries are coming and just ripping up the landscape, and it affects the air and the water, obviously terribly. So we've been seeing these effects for a while. It's getting more attention. They're really important, books. Wen Stevenson, What We're Fighting For Now Is Each Other. Obviously, Naomi Klein, This Changes Everything. There are a lot of people that are speaking out who are really drawing attention down to the ground where people are fighting this daily.
I was going to ask you if there was going to be a sequel to An Inconvenient Truth, but I hope not, because it would probably be pretty damning. And but we might need more evidence in order to elicit the public consciousness that you're describing. I asked this question of Naomi Oreskes, the climatologist at Harvard University. In fairness, I want to ask it of you, affiliated with Columbia or indirectly through the Union Theological Seminary. How is this issue of divestment playing out on campus as far as you're concerned?
Well, at Union Theological Seminary, our board did vote to divest from all fossil fuels, and that was something we were very proud of last year.
Separate from Columbia.
We're separate from Columbia. We're affiliated,
right.
As is Jewish Theological Seminary and others in that neighborhood. We have a really strong affiliation. But I can't actually speak to the conversation at Columbia because, truthfully, I don't really know where that stands right now. I know that they said that they have divested from private prisons, and that is a very important discussion that I followed a little bit, and I was in some meetings in the coalition of Columbia, people affiliated with Columbia who were discussing that. But I don't quite know where they stand on the fossil fuel thing right now.
It's very difficult to do that kind of self-audit of your environmental impact when the focus is so much on the dollars and cents. Mm-hmm. You'd like to imagine an auditor to come into an organization and say, well, beyond your carbon footprint, how are you impacting the well-being not only of a paycheck but of a society? What's your vision for how faith leaders are going to practice what they preach in their individual institutions? Obviously, the Vatican has not divested from fossil fuels or any kind of dirty energy. What's the step forward there?
Well, we want to see divestment, and that is a very interesting conversation because not everybody has seen the connection to your pocketbook, to the market, in terms of what values you want to see in the world, and it's important that we do that. Also, of course, we can live in ways as communities as well as individuals that are more conscious of the ecosystems that we're in, of the waste that we generate. And that's something that I find one barrier to that can be that people don't want to feel ashamed. They don't want to be shamed. They don't want to be in a conversation where, if you happen to have a plastic bottle of water, then you're going to sort of get dirty looks for it. We're really interested in moving beyond that and trying to have the kinds of systemic changes on community levels as well that can make a difference in the aggregate. So I think that there are lots of changes that can happen on different levels.
Naomi Oreskes and I talked about the Pope's concern about fundamentalism in a religious context. We can appreciate that because of how fanatics have hijacked religions to enact real human suffering. Mm-hmm. At the same time, the people who are so-called skeptics or deniers, they gravitate to this idea that you are fundamentalist in your conviction of this fact, and mm-hmm. therefore I am going to hold a different position, and if your position threatens my livelihood in some way, I'm not going to give you any ground.
Right. It's really interesting to see. I think one thing that's been useful is to just think about the framework that is promoted by the people who want the fossil fuel era to continue. And they are very aggressive in this idea that you're a hypocrite if you are speaking out for change and yet, you still drive a car and you still use electricity. That is a tactic. That's not something that we should just kind of absorb and let it paralyze us. It's a tactic, and also you can already see the fallacy in some of these efforts to sort of say that, well, being anti global warming or anti-carbon or anti-climate change is not good for the poor. It's actually going to hurt the poor, that fighting poverty necessitates more extraction of fossil fuels. That's currently the framework that they're handing us. And yet you can see through some of the books I just mentioned before about how the poor are leading a movement against the extractionist industries and against the harm that they're doing. And you can also see countries that are engaged in the Paris talks where, we were told that no, the developing nations, so-called developing nations, are not going to want to make any sacrifices in extracting energy, but yet the Philippines, Mexico, these are cultures that are recognizing that this is not good and it's not in line with core human values to go ahead, and so they're stepping up, trying to get a good agreement in Paris. So all of that is just to say that I'm glad you sort of flag that. It's complicated, but I just want to say it's not. to have a healthier food choice be more expensive than a processed, packaged food choice, it doesn't have to be that way. That's because of policies. The same way that, to say that solar panels and windmills are too expensive, more expensive than fossil fuels, if that's true in certain places, it's because of policy. We need to change it and not just accept it at face value.
Are you referring to loopholes that favor corporations that are environmentally unfriendly?
I mean that, and I mean subsidies as well. It's shocking the amount that still goes on. At the same time, governments are saying we need to stop that form of energy. They're subsidizing it. And
unpack that accusation or paradox of hypocrisy for us, because that is a strong thrust of what you're calling an unsound, fundamentally argument. And it's I remember seeing the incriminating tweets about any number of world summits or forums in which, yes, people were traveling on the airlines to get to X or Y location.
I understand. I do understand that. I don't think that we need to gloss over and say, there is no complexity here. I think there is some, and we do live in a world in which we are using all kinds of products and mechanisms that rely on fossil fuels right now. But that doesn't mean we don't see a vision for what's better, and we can work towards that, and that it's a process. And I think that's important to remember.
I would imagine an answer could be, just as you have LEED certified buildings, there should be the equivalent for airlines, or something to that effect, right?
Yes.
If you can turn around and say, well, I was flying emission-free air.
I think that's really hopeful to start to have more market-based solutions. I mean, a few things are helpful to me to think about this. One is, I don't have a total faith the market is going to save us. Some people, I hear this kind of argument a lot, and it worries me a little bit because I worry about the inequities involved in that. But I do think that that it's important to see, for instance, that it seems to be moving so that there are more choices food-wise, where it's marketed on the basis of the fact that clearly people want to have it free from all of these chemicals and the cruelty factor and all these things. And I think that could certainly start to happen more with fossil fuels, the more that people are aware of the real harm, because there still is not a vast awareness of that, I find. But also, I think it's useful to look back on the civil rights movement for some of this, and to think about how changes were framed in different ways. So to fight segregation then was framed as sort of like a federal state issue, as involving the complexities of hypocrisy and all of these things that were in systemic kind of interdependencies. But really, it came down to right and wrong. And that changed it a lot, to look at it in a different way. And I think that's where moral voices and religious and spiritual leaders can make a difference.
Come back to the ethics. So in that spirit, what is the ethical blueprint that, going back to the golden rule, what is the ethical blueprint that you espouse in the way that religious leaders should confront this?
Well, I wouldn't say that I have a clear blueprint that's very detailed, so much as that I would love to see a facilitation of people feeling some control over how their communities are shaped and what values they run on. And because a lot of people experience their moral obligations to others, their sense of living out their values through their religious faith, then that is a place to think about that and to start that change. And so even in the sense of sort of democratic processes, small d, whereby people can look at development policies. So one of the things that we're able to do at the Center for Earth Ethics is we do these sort of immersion workshop courses and go to places where we have allies and talk to them about their concerns and bring in things like Bible study and consultation with the indigenous wisdom, maybe from Native American leaders from that area, which is exciting and different. And so we did that in Alabama recently. We went to Baltimore and did a study of Laudato Si. that included a Bible study. And one of the things that we're seeing is that development, when it happens, economic growth, doesn't take into account, it's short-term profit driven. And a lot of times, just corporate actors come in and take a tax write-off and sort of impose on the landscape. I mean, you see it everywhere, these big box stores, and it might mean jobs and lower prices for a little while, but it doesn't always mean that long term, and it's not always something that benefits the community. Certainly not when it's fossil fuel companies that are coming in and doing that, as happens a lot in the states around the Gulf. So I think in terms of, faith leadership can, and I don't mean to say only faith leadership, it's also community leaders, anyone who's not beholden. I mean, the problem is our political system, so many elected officials are taking so much money from these industries that it's not really working how it should. So when you talk to people, they say, the problem is, we don't have people representing us. They just take orders directly from these big corporations that are donating. So I think that faith leaders can provide community-based leadership spaces for reflection, discussion of values, like I was saying before, not just political feasibility and short-term financial gain. So I'm sorry to go on a bit in that answer, but that's a little bit what occurs to me.
I was going to ask you why, and you explained, because there's this unstoppable flow of solicitation from the corporate community. But the question really is what to do about it. So you explained why it's such a challenging political issue. Now we have to get to the how. Mm-hmm. How do you fix it? We talked about divestment, but beyond that, you entered this fray as a lawyer, and your father entered this fray as a lawyer. Well, with some legislative know-how,
with some legal
right?
training,
right.
and as a lawmaker, as a former lawmaker.
As a former lawmaker, and you're a former lawyer, and in order to change the game, you need new laws, right?
Yes. We need new laws, and there are laws at lots of different levels, obviously, and all of them are important. I talk a little bit about the justice-based culture work. That's not my phrase. It's a colleague, Jackie Patterson. I heard her say that, of the NAACP Environmental and Climate Defense Initiative. And that work is important too, but the laws are very important, and the problem of money in politics is really central. So since Citizen United, and I'm not a font of statistics and numbers on this, they are out there and they're very startling, and it's worth consulting them, and it's worth more transparency to see exactly who takes money from these industries, who's voting on them. I mean, it's just because it's legal doesn't mean it's not corruption. It's complete corruption of our process. And so I think, since Citizens United, we see more of a problem with the amounts of money, with the legal rights being claimed by corporations. And also, they're just a set of campaign finance laws that are really rigged in a bad way for this. So we need to change them. I think we should have a constitutional amendment to overturn Citizens United. There's efforts underway for that. There are also efforts underway for campaign finance reform, which are very important. But just to kind of get communities in states where they have the power to do things like, New York State banned fracking. That was a big win. Those are the kinds of things that make a difference too.
Well, as we conclude here, it's clear that your mission is for the laws of ethics or morality to assume a role in shaping the laws of our legislative bodies.
Working at Union Theological Seminary, there's a great history of that. We've had social ethicists based there like Reinhold Niebuhr and Paul Tillich, who spoke out on issues going back to intervention in Nazi Germany. So, and also in the nuclear age, really spoke about ethics being a part of those discussions. So it's certainly part of the mission to have the field of earth ethics make a difference. I
just think about the difficulty, again, of civil disobedience on this kind of issue. Essentially, you have to not function in order to, in so many instances, be disobedient. I think that you cannot let yourself go into
paralysis by the many, many ways in which we're implicated. I mean, including we all wear clothing, we have to figure out where it's made, we have the food that we eat. There's so many ways in which our global economy has implicated us that it can feel paralyzing. But I think the goal of Earth Ethics is to sort that out and say, you know, there are some cases where we're actually called to accountability in a very specific, hands-on, on-the-ground way. And that can come where we're discussing policy and law changes, chances to change the system that we're all living in.
And the first step is to go to the pew and acknowledge the problem, right?
Well, it's not just for people who are church-going, but I think in terms of churches have been bases for communities for a long time in this country. So in that sense, I think go to the centers of your community. This is how, I mean, this is a country that was based on a beautiful vision of democracy that really needs to function again.
I mean that in the broadest sense of a confessional. Not specific to one religion, but really I think there is a population of our country that has refused to accept that it has to participate in that confessional. It's true.
There is no denying that when you look at polls and numbers of people who want to talk about this or think about this as a major problem that we all need to confront, it can be a bit disheartening. But I think that can change. That can change because there are a lot of people who actually, I think, do feel a certain discontent with a culture that's just an engine of consumerism without thinking about values, and that is really what we're talking about here. Let's stop and think about what's really important in life and how we can conserve it.
Karenna, thanks so much for joining me today.
Thank you so much, Alexander. Pleasure.
And thanks to you in the audience. I hope you join us again next time for a thoughtful excursion into the world of ideas. Until then, keep an open mind. Please visit the Open Mind website at 13.org/openmind to view this program online or to access over 1,500 other interviews. And do check us out on Twitter and Facebook at Open Mind TV for updates on future programming.
Continuing production of The Open Mind has been made possible by grants from Anne Olnick Gumowitz, the Engelson Family Foundation, the Alfred P. Sloan Foundation, the Joan Gans Cooney and Peter G. Peterson Fund, the Rosalind P. Walter Foundation, the Joanne and Kenneth Wellner Foundation, Sally Menard and Norton Garfinkel, with special thanks to the Schumann Media Center for additional support, and from the corporate community, Mutual of America.